Hi, everyone, and we're super happy to have you on in this session hosted by NEWFORUM under the umbrella of Transmedia Fashion Research. And in these conversations, we're trying to aim and unveil the detangled term of fashion and the implication beyond just garment creation, such as like digital fashion, but more as like a transversal discipline, and really dissect the internet culture and transmedia aspect of fashion. And these spaces are here for discussion, and we don't have specific definitions, but we look for a space and conversation where we aim to cultivate a flow of creativity that sustains and liberates us. So it's really free, and we really want to push forward and dive deeper into the topics that we are going to mention. And we're super excited for everyone here. And I'm Joyce for everyone. I know it doesn't show on the screen, but I have a background in sustainable fashion, and now I'm working in the Web3 space, and I mainly host a podcast together with my amazing co-hosts. And we're happy to kick off the session. And now I pass on to my amazing colleague, Marina.
Thank you, Joyce. So if you don't know me yet, I'm Marina Atarova. My background is in innovation. I've been living in London for quite a long time. That's how I actually met Matthew and Moin. Yeah, but now I'm really fascinated about blockchain, and our subject today is going to be quite a lot about AI, blockchain, and fashion. Our topic is called "The Dawn of Fashion Transgressing Algorithms." But don't worry, we're going to make it simple. We will try to explain and talk and research everything about how all these innovative technologies are integrated within fashion industry, and what are the benefits or maybe even the negative effects potentially. So that is all about our subject. So yeah, let's introduce our fantastic panel. We have the team from Fashion Innovation Agency, Matthew Drinkwater and Moin Roberts-Islam. And we also have Johannes Saam. Guys, please do introduce yourself. Let's start maybe with Johannes.
Hello, everybody. Yes, my name is Johannes Saam. I am a visual effects artist and computer graphics kind of expert by trade. I've done almost 15 years of film visual effects all around the world, Hollywood-style movies, and then have slowly moved into the fringes of digital content creation by joining Framestore and starting a kind of a real-time technologies team in LA, where I spent 5 years working and building up a team specializing in kind of real-time animation, visual effects, and any sort of weird CGI projects that are hard to do and are, not the standard type of content creation. And have since COVID started, moved back to Australia, where I spent a huge chunk of my life, and now with family, kind of working remote from Sydney, Australia. I don't have a lot to do with fashion besides marrying a fashion designer, but have, through my AI and Web3 presence, met the Fashion Innovation Agency team and kind of signed on as the computer graphics, animation, AI, making pretty pictures with a computer expert. Along my journeys, I've picked up an Academy Award and numerous other kind of VFX related things, but now I'm focused completely on innovation, future, Web3, and mainly AI generated images.
Shall I go next? Thanks, Johannes. Hi everyone, I'm Matthew Drinkwater. I head up the innovation agency at LCF. The college, for those of you who don't know what we do, it has given us an amazing remit to kind of explore any emerging technology and its impact on the fashion and retail industries. So we just build proof of concept with that technology to try and accelerate the pace of change in the fashion industry, try and kind of increase adoption of technology, show what's possible, what's coming. I mean, typically our remit has been looking at technologies that are sort of 3 to 5 years from commercialization, and probably up until 2020, I felt like that was quite a stable kind of landscape. It was something that we were able to kind of see. I kind of feel like 3 to 5 weeks in the future now is beginning to dip into the realms of the unknown. So that pace of change over kind of 10 years or so since we've been doing this has really generally accelerated. So it's an exciting space, but we're there to kind of bring back into the university whatever we learn, to try and send out another generation of creatives who have a much better understanding of emerging technology and how it will impact on their future working life in whatever field that they go into.
Hi, everyone. I'm Moin Roberts-Islam. I work with Matthew at the Fashion Innovation Agency. I am the Technology Development Manager. So what that means is my job is to go out and find exciting new technologies and new practitioners like Johannes for us to work with and put together proof of concept collaborations that showcase the best ways that emerging technology can disrupt business as usual in fashion. And then, kind of work on those projects from the technology side and oversee them to completion. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys. So let's start with this amazing project that you've done together. So the team of Fashion Innovation Agency worked with Johannes, the legend of AI, and the artists, and amazing artists. And it was, I think, with collaboration with Nvidia, right? And it was a generative catwalk. Joyce, do you want to share quickly a video so everyone understands?
I think, Johannes, it'd be great if you could describe this one.
Sure, I can do that. So I was approached by the Fashion Innovation Agency to see how far we could push a kind of a purely AI-generated catwalk. So I went and started to source together with the guys some pictures for prominent designers, and then started to train individual AI models that were inspired by 5 big designers of their current collections, and also by my own work. So to have like a different approach of like purely digital versus based in the real world. And then after those models had been trained, we used a old, I don't know how old, guys, but I think it was from 2019 Fashion Innovation Catwalk show. So there's all real models walking. It's actually only one that has been that replays and mirrored. And then they have been redressed, and their motion is basically from the original catwalk. So it's the background at this point, and then the digital garments are pulled over those walks and put into this fashion show. It uses a lot of digital compositing and AI generated tools that are partly, just available tools, as well as my own stuff to kind of generate those AI images based on the animations or the walk of the real model. And I think it inspires us to see where we could go with a hallucinated fashion, with those different styles that are coming together, to trying to be as stable and as interesting as possible while maintaining a style that is at least what we think kind of still works with the intention of the designers.
Yeah, it was the show from 2020. You can actually see me in the audience taking photographs as usual, hiding away. And I think it was really exciting, and Moin can jump in on some of the technical elements as well. But I think it's a process that we'd started probably in 2019, when we had some friends of mine who were at MIT come over to London College of Fashion to begin to start developing what would become an AI course. There was an elective AI course for our students, and they were getting kind of their first glimpses of how to use Python, and were learning how to scrape websites. And it was a really fun experience. And I also, when I think back to what it was back then, it was a huge amount of work of trying to build up data sets, and it was quite labor intensive, slow process. And it's been fun to see over that time period how much more available the tools have become to begin to generate this content. And I think what in 2019, 2020 needed a lot of technical skills, not to say that what you've just seen didn't require a huge amount of technical skills, but I think what is becoming widely more available as tools for a much wider segment of the population to begin to access and to generate content. And it is beginning to create non-traditional pathways into the fashion industry. And it's almost as if it's like this own category that's being created. Like the generative space feels, I don't know, there's a bit of tension between kind of traditional stuff, but and whether or not this is replacing something. But it, for me anyway, it feels like almost its own category and its own kind of art form.
So it would be interesting actually to know how can fashion industry use, I guess, technologies like this? Like what are the use cases?
I mean, there are a lot. And I think when we were doing the Nvidia session, it was interesting to kind of see during the Q&A how many people were beginning to ask about not just purely creative processes, but actual more practical business use cases of generative. And like, I mean, I think every element of the industry will be impacted, from marketing, content to supply chain. There's applications all the way through. And I think those skill sets and what we need to start seeing from all of the creatives that we put and executives that will come out of the college in the future is just a better understanding of how to apply it and to be practicing with those tools. Because whether you come from our fashion business school, our school of media and communications, or pure design, there will be a use case. Like, I mean, I think even when we're mood boarding projects now, and we can generate images so quickly, it really changes our workflow of what we can do and how we want to communicate that project. So, I mean, I just think from those very basic elements, if we see a generation beginning to start adopting that and beginning to build it into their practice, some of those use cases will become, I mean, they will evolve over time. But I think beyond those practical use cases, like some of the storytelling possibilities become incredibly interesting. So yeah, I mean, I'll let Johannes touch on where that might go, even in the very near future. But I think whatever field you're in, there's going to be an application, and we need to see our students, all of our creators, beginning to work with it immediately.
I think that's very interesting because, as you hint, the hint here is, I think it applies to every industry. Like, not even staying within the fashion context. All our lives will be touched, I think, dramatically by one aspect of this technology or all of them. So I think it's not necessarily a question on what part of fashion will be, affected. It's more like, how can we use a trend that's definitely coming in society and in all of our lives, and making sure that we adopt it in a productive, inclusive, and also positive way into this industry. And that's why I think this concept is a good idea, because we are showing how a very small team, because you looking at the team right now, can create a full catwalk with models and everything. And the good part is, while yes, it is an effort to create a longer piece, we did this over the span of, I think, effectively working on it. And I have another job, like I kind of did this on the side, so it's not that I've worked on this only. So the time spent on this is probably effectively 2 weeks, maybe, if even. So, and we have those models ready now. So I could make 10, 100 more minutes of the same content. It obviously, there's some compositing involved, and it's not as easy as just hitting a button and then now there's like a 90-minute piece coming out the other end. But it is relatively easy to, once the models are trained, and it's very hard for me to understand, because obviously there's the AI model and the actual human model, as in the professional model. So when I say model, I mean 99% of the time I mean the AI trained model. And once those are there, we can just create content over and over again. And this is, I think, one of the, again, Matthew said it, for social media content. It's like, once you have something, you can create pictures, especially still pictures, so quickly that Instagram accounts can be flooded with your style. Is that something that's good or bad? I let that. I think it's how you use it. It's not the tool's fault necessarily how this all evolves. But yeah, I think I've talked too much. But it is transforming all of our lives, no matter what. So the genie is out of the bottle. We might as well harness its power for our own sake in a good way.
Just to add kind of going back to your original question about the use cases, the original project that inspired this one, the one that Matt mentioned from 2019 that we did with MIT, that was basically just before lockdown. So we had a lot of students who that year weren't able to show their catwalks in the traditional way that they'd be used to. They'd show their graduate collections, have friends and family come down and see that. But what we did was we basically captured motion data from catwalk footage, from original sort of video footage, extracted that motion data and put it into Unity instances, and then, put new avatars, garments, lighting, environments, and so on there. So there was at least some form of output for some of the students. Obviously, we weren't able to do it for all of the students at LCF, but, for as many as we were able to. And that right there is just a practical example of where AI can help you. If you've got limiting factors, if you've got the inability to shoot somewhere, if you can't get everyone in one place, whatever it might be, it allows you to kind of cut around those corners and put together really kind of compelling and believable outputs that still meet the standards that you're looking for without necessarily having to have those real world, practical, kind of tangible assets available to you. So it's quite an interesting tool from just even from that standpoint. And then kind of when we did this project, the inspiration was the tools that are out there now, the kind of chat GPTs, the DALL-Es, where you just type in an input and you get this kind of amazing, miraculous output. The thinking behind this one, we didn't get to create the tool by the end of a project, but the thinking was that with those 5 designs that Johannes mentioned that we picked out and kind of mood boarded, was that you'd be able to type in the name of the designer and it would automatically reflect the style of that designer on the archive footage. So, these are pre-trained models, so it's a slight get around, but the aim would be to kind of develop a tool whereby you can just make stylistic changes to a video just by typing in an input.
But it's been an interesting process, isn't it? Because I think that when you describe it, when you talk about it, there is that sense of, oh, it's just text prompt. And I think kind of in the wider media, there is still a sense that literally anyone can just type in. And to a certain extent, like we said, that's true. But I think it kind of, it misses all of the technical work that is kind of allowing it to get to the point where you're struggling to tell the difference between what's real and what's not. Like when that original video runs, I remember when we first put it up, so many people struggled to understand even what was happening. They didn't even realize that it wasn't a real catwalk. And that sense of where we're beginning to push things even now is really interesting, but it doesn't happen without kind of still a huge amount of human input into that process. It's still something that requires a lot of work to deliver. But yeah, I mean, it's fun to see the new tools that kind of emerge week after week. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not to toot my own horn, but yes, it requires an expert to do this. Like, I think it's the same. It's totally fair enough to call it it's just a tool, which it is. But it's also the difference between somebody who does 2 YouTube tutorials and then opens Photoshop and Photoshops something. And if they're very talented and if they spend more time, I'm pretty sure they can get really good. But there's people who understand digital pixel manipulation at the highest level and doing that for 20 years and then using Photoshop. So I think there's no difference in that from a tooling side. I think where the Photoshop example does not work is by having all those companies right now jumping into this space and competing in a very, very fast pace to be the best ones, and sometimes kind of blurring the lines a bit between how good stuff is and how good stuff will be, kind of selling you the future because it's just an alpha and you're trying to get there. So to go from marketing website front end to actual catwalk show, there's a huge difference. But I think it's totally fine in us using those tools at the highest level to show what will be possible, because even I, who literally spent 2 years by now doing AI generated images, since it kind of first started to be a thing back on weird internet forums, I would have not thought a year ago that we are where we are now. I would have probably said this is going to happen in 5 years. Like being able to do a thing that we did, I would probably a year ago have said this is 2, 3, 4, 5 years away. Now we can already do this. So even if the experts on the subject are wrong by orders of magnitude, then you can imagine how fast the pace is right now. I mean, like a group of obviously of AI creators, and we all have what's called sleep FOMO between us now, because every time you go to sleep, there's another paper when you wake up that you have to read and implement, because it's always so fast and you can't even catch up with it, which I don't think is a good thing, because not necessarily, that's when all the people come in who kind of trying to upsell things, or like 17 startups who kind of latch on one paper and trying to just do a thing. So it's a bit hard to understand the full range of possibilities, but at the core, I strongly believe that, as I said before, that this technology is going to change all our lives in many aspects.
That's very interesting. Thanks, Johannes. And I love the discussion about the tools as well, like what the technology, how like fast it is developing, and it's really like an exponential kind of growth of everything, really, it feels like. And we always have quite a few artists, digital artists in the audience, in our community. And it would be great to kind of dive a bit more what tools are really great right now for creating, regenerative fashion or, AI tools. We can dive into that a bit later, but now I'm really fascinated about, I think, the adoption of this type of technologies by brands and by the industry itself. I know that Matthew had a really a lot of discussions in your podcast previously about like the fear of how actually it is difficult for fashion industry maybe like to follow the whole innovation, and maybe it is a little bit like scary even to jump into this whole wagon of the whole progress. And I don't know, what do you think about it? Is it going to happen really fast, or is it going to take a bit of time when the fashion brands or the big fashion houses going to start using technologies like this?
I mean, I think there's depending on who you talk to and where you go, that different brands are at different stages, and there are lots already experimenting. But I think, like most things in fashion, everything is kind of marketing led initially, and you'll have those conversations where maybe in 6 months' time you might speak to a team at a luxury fashion house, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, we've done AI," as if it's like this thing to be done, ticked off the box, and then they move on, as opposed to kind of more structural change within an organization. But I think, to Johannes' point, like what is happening is, I think I've had a slide deck in one of my presentations for years now about like the industry being on this tipping point of something like a huge change, but it genuinely feels like almost everything, all of those building blocks for how fashion is created, how it's communicated, how we as consumers actually buy it is changing. That is happening right now, and I think it feels almost inevitable that those tools are implemented in a much wider use case across teams. And so, I mean, I feel like it's unavoidable for the industry, and that if they're not beginning to use those tools, then others will, and that is how you'll see that being pushed. Moin, I don't know in your conversations with brands whether you've had a similar response, but
yeah, basically I thought what Matt's saying there is that either you've got people who are really early in their kind of digital journey who are quite scared, reticent, want to see what someone else has done first, or you've got those teams where we spoke to a brand recently who told us they had 400 digital artists working at the brand, which is amazing, really forward-thinking, progressive kind of brand. And so you'll have a kind of real disparity in the ambitions of those two brands. I think one thing that we will see is, if we do see certainly the larger brands using AI, you're going to see those kind of nearer term use cases. You're going to see those kind of lower hanging fruits, the things that are really quite possible, and it's quite easy to get a really polished result. Because I think one of the things with fashion brands, new technologies, is that they still want the output to be as high quality as the stuff they're used to putting out. So I don't think you'll see too much ambitious stuff right off the bat. You will in time, obviously, but people are going to start with fairly kind of low-level iterations of AI technologies, because it gives a safe output, a more controlled, more predictable output, which isn't necessarily the beauty of these AI tools. But I think that's a safer way to go. As Matt said, it's very marketing-led, and marketing is quite a sort of controlled business.
I mean, I do find that kind of perception of imagery and control of imagery and perfection an interesting one, because like a lot of brands have some insistence on it looking perfect and presenting themselves in the best way, and then they turn up at Metaverse Fashion Week, just say, like, there's aesthetically there's a jump sometimes. And I think kind of to Johannes' point, this hierarchy of what good looks like, what is best practice, this is what everyone is beginning to figure out. We describe them as tools, but like I remember when Unity acquired Weta, there was a press release that went out that said, now anybody can create Academy Award-winning visual effects at home. And it's like, well, sure, like I can give you a paintbrush and a canvas, and now you can go and create Michelangelo or Salvador Dali or whatever. You know, that there is a gap between just having access to something and then being able to utilize it at a very high level. And because we're at that formative stage, like I think what the industry needs to see is kind of what does amazing look like? What is the best that can be delivered? And then that hierarchy and almost building up, and I've talked about it before, a lot of that digital savoir-faire. Like, well, what does digital couture look like? And Johannes is in VFX. Like when you go to the movies and you see a film with really good visual effects, like I think you know that, you appreciate that, and you see that there's some work, or maybe you don't even notice because it's so good. But if it's really bad, you also notice that. And I think there's a very instant reaction to that. That understanding is still kind of missing a little bit in where those worlds cross over. And that is what I think kind of the next 5 years, if you want to project into that far forward, is like as we begin to see a new skill sets kind of building up, that's what will happen.
I mean, if you allow me, for example, quickly to share my screen for 30 seconds, I just loaded something up that I did while I was traveling.
That'd be fantastic. I was actually also wanting to ask you as an artist, like, what do you think about it? Because even in your poem, you wrote like a really nice poem. I don't know if you know.
I didn't write that. That's ChatGPT.
Oh, you writing it?
No, it's ChatGPT. Yeah. That's why that was the whole point of it. I didn't write it. But it is brilliant, isn't it?
And you're talking about the fear of an artist that the AI will take your job, and it will be really interesting to hear your opinion about it. Like,
absolutely. In the meantime, I just think for all, just for the artist, from an artist point of view, I feel it's not a unique problem to have. We have all been through this numerous times before. We have pretty sure I always use the example of the monks in the Dark Ages that were really pissed off when the printing press came out, because now suddenly every idiot with a printing press could make beautiful books and everybody could read them. And it's a very similar problem. While it sounds funny, because it is a problem of what is true, what is fact. You know, where do you get your information from? Is very similar to the AI problem. So from an artist's point of view, I feel like it is an opportunity more than a job killer, because while, for example, it will make certain processes easier, usually the processes that it makes easier, processes that are really hard and labor intensive to do, and it also multiplies the amount of content that is created. So while you probably spend less time on a specific task, you have more clients and you have a more diverse field of people interested into it. So I think it's more of an opportunity. Obviously, I'm drinking the AI Kool-Aid constantly, so take what I say with a grain of salt, of course. But that leads me quickly to sharing my screen. I have a little AI stack that I can run on my laptop. So those are all images I created, like street fashion or high fashion images I created while traveling in Germany and Japan for the last 4 weeks with my family. So that shows you how cool it is and how what quality of work is accessible. So this is obviously done with a virtual camera kind of aspect to make sure it looks as good as possible. But if you look at this image, for example, I mean, there is nothing that you could zoom in on where you are like, okay, this is AI generated. This is totally, you know, a potential snapshot I did when I was time traveling to the 90s to Tokyo, or here. I mean, there's certain things usually in the background where you start seeing it, but we're still images. We're at a level where this is, and again, remind you, this is nothing of this is real. This is all computer generated. Even those kind of more, you know, very intricate, detaily things are starting to look really, really, really good. The moving picture is very, very close, or not close, but I didn't think we would get to that quality again, you know, till years in the future. Animated pictures are still a different story, but if we continue in the same pace, we will soon have those pictures at least be able to, I mean, we can all remove cameras slightly and we can make them maybe nod their heads, but that's it. but I'm sure pretty soon those can be emotive faces that talk to you. And at that point, the interactive component, I think, becomes really interesting, that Moin was hinting on before, is that if I can generate these pictures in 30 seconds on my laptop for you, imagine what marketing material I could make. And that always has a bad taste in my mouth because I'm not a marketing person. But I think from a storytelling, and this is what I kind of think is the thing that connects all those elements, is a good story. We can make stories that are really tailored to the person consuming the story. And I think that's the true power from an artist and from a creator point of view.
Nirmala from the Fabricant is here. Nirmala, I don't know if you want to come on, would love to, but I can also share the question for you if you want to.
Yeah, I think that this conversation is amazing, and amazing to have you all in the same space to talk about it, because I think, like, you know, like the AI fashion, it's really blowing up, and I think we were talking about adoption, and it feels like now, you know, at the Fabricant, obviously we're really focused on digital fashion, and we see like even the adoption for that is coming, but it's really connected to the physical fashion, and it feels like for traditional brands to really embrace it, they still need to kind of find a way to leverage their existing product with it. And I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts? Like, I think with digital and physical fashion, we see things like AR filters or wearables that are quite directly connected to the physical product. How do you kind of see an AI feature connected to a physical fashion product potentially? Or do you have thoughts about that?
I mean, I'm on the jury at AI Fashion Week, and like there's a big push to have those pieces created as physical products at the end of the process, which in some ways is probably the least, for me anyway, it's the least interesting part of the process. Like I in some ways that I don't want generative AI to be, and you can see how very quickly, to Johannes' point, like you can tailor and individually you could create, I guess, a more intelligent fast fashion system based on that data to create a much more personalized experience for you. And in some ways that is good for the industry, but you could see how fast fashion could massively adopt that. But I think also there's some really fun use cases that you could begin to pair immersive technologies with generative AI, and in, you know, you could begin to envisage digital fashion, speech prompted, text prompted to be created almost instantly, to be kind of manipulated depending on environment or how you're feeling. These are the things which there are already a few examples out in the space, but I feel like will become even more interesting in the years ahead. Moin, was there anything else that you want to jump?
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, it kind of taking it back some is just kind of how to connect those physical products with AI sort of more directly. One of the projects that we did again a while back with MIT, there was one where an algorithm was trained on 40,000 instances of dresses, data scraped from a bunch of sort of retail sites, and then it spat out a whole bunch of dresses that were all very plausible, very believable as real dresses. And you know, did it in really kind of quick succession, all very impressive. And I think when we first showed that to people were getting really scared and saying, "Oh God, you're going to replace designers X, Y, Z. You know, it's going to be terrible. It's the end of the industry." But if you looked at each of those dresses, not every single one of those is a dress that's going to sell, a dress that's going to appeal to a particular audience, a dress with a particular kind of personality. And I think what you would do is you would use these tools currently in their current iteration. Obviously, they're going to get better and they are going to be able to sort of imitate styles more and more closely. But the way that they are now, you can get 50,000 dresses come out really, really quickly, but you won't want to use them all. You'll still need human eyes on that. You'll need someone with a creative direction, someone with a steer, someone with, you know, an understanding of the audience that they're being marketed to pick out a few of those, maybe pick out 4 and say, right, we've got these 4, but not any one of them is quite right. And then you hand it over to your design team, to your pattern cutters, to actually go and physically manifest those, iterate on them, twirl them, you know, so on. And that's the point you'll get to. So it's a shortcut. It's certainly a design shortcut. It kind of helps you to iterate on the kind of more manual or boring or iterative parts of the process. And that's something that we need to remember about these generative AI tools, is that they're iterative. They are trained on a finite data set. They can only move around within that box, within that data set. They can't think of something outside of that. They can combine it in different ways, in ways that we may not have done previously, but it's still solutions from within that finite data set. So it's convergent, it's iterating on a point. So the tools are useful in that sense. They're not necessarily going to replace us straight away. Now, there was a comment about, are they going to replace our jobs? I've seen this quote a number of times. I don't know who to attribute it to, but it's AI is not going to take your job. A person using AI will.
There is some kind of, if you see kind of that direction, and also to that point, like that human eye on it, is that how Shein creating their X number of SKUs? Honestly, I can see for fast fashion how at scale that allows for huge amounts of product to be created, marketed, even down to kind of individual levels. That level of kind of personalization becomes a lot more scalable.
I think that, first of all, I realized I'm actually wearing a digital / real fashion item right now. It's just funny because it's literally my plane outfit from flying back from holiday. But I think this is a good example, for example, how you have because my digital self-expression is not necessarily my what do you call it, the real self-expression,
Physical.
my physical / IRL self-expression is different to who I represent, how I want to be represented, at least in my case, in the metaverse or in a digital context. And how I want to express myself digitally is way more fluid than it is in the real world. So maybe I want to be a fabulous dragon with a ball gown today in the metaverse, and tomorrow somebody completely different. So, and I feel like that's where this customization element is really, really good. And I think it's not necessarily for the big fashion houses, to be honest. I think it's going to be another tool. I think, once they went from doing everything on pen and paper to digital to 3D to, that's the next iteration. It's just the next step. But I think where the power is the YouTubeification of fashion creation, where rather you have the big studios who are the only ones who can make movies or content at a certain level of quality, can give this into the hands to Joe Blow somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and their creativity and their life experiences and their personal journey adds to the volume or to the ideas of what can get created, and can create something way more powerful for their peers, for their tribe, for their surrounding than any other studio could ever do. So I don't think it's an A or B thing, it's an A and B thing. Like you have one and you have the other, and that's going to be the same for movies in my mind, or in sort of any sort of content creation and games even, but also fashion and even billboards. You walk into a store and they know who you are, and you get the billboard presented of the fashion item that you want based on your preferences and all those kind of things. You can see how it's a bit like in Minority Report. There's that scene where they scan their eyeball when you go into the subway and suddenly all the billboards change. Something like this. Obviously, this is very dystopian, but you can see how this could be the Netflix contents. Why do I have to watch a Netflix movie that that somebody has created for me, when my life experience and my input into the system could make something on demand that I want to see? And I think the same could be for fashion.
Yeah, I think that's definitely. I want to just add one thing, because I think those are all great points, and it sounds like it's really like you talked about. It's the tool set, and what you said, Matthew, about the intelligent fast fashion. That's scary, but yeah, I mean, it could happen. I think one other thought I just had as you were talking, like, do you see, because you were also mentioning, Johannes, about your identity and how, as we shape our identity by kind of remixing what brand, different brands and things like that. Do you imagine that a brand like, a big brand who really kind of own a look, like the way Balenciaga owns a look, or Alexander McQueen, that there could be an AI model? And I think what you were saying, Matthew, is that you can kind of come and just type, I want a trench coat, I wanted this, and it could kind of just create something, and then does it get made physically? What like it really feels like that customer, like almost like personal customization of a brand. It is, like you mentioned, like the YouTube, right? Like I'm customizing the Balenciaga for me, for my body, for my look, whatever. It could, that's a really interesting product.
I think every brand, though, I really want to put the point home that, it's the storytelling aspect. I think every brand, while they own a look, they mainly own a story that they're telling you through their look. And I think that story is what is the important part. It's the sitting around the fire, telling each other stories, core element that we all have that is expressed in so many different ways. And I think Balenciaga can A, use it as a tool again, but also B, as a, having a model available that is trained on or is able to create stuff in their style, and then you add your story to it, and your story and their story together is what makes an even deeper connection to a brand. Because an experience that is you, but also the brand's sanctioned way of going through an experience, I think, is bonds you watch much more than watching an ad, seeing somebody else wear it, or just reading about it.
I think the question of identities is really fascinating, because that the fashion is all about expressing your identity, your status, your reputation. And now with the progression of AI and creative industries, I think it's interesting to see what would be the impact on our identities really online. And there is a lot of fear for creators, for example, of how do they safeguard their IP or reputation. And maybe for all of us, because there is a lot of deep fakes. I don't know if you heard of this expression, but there is a lot of fake images of even fake videos, even fake audios being created. And I think it will be a big question about how do we actually protect our data or our identity in the future with AI, and especially within fashion industry, I guess, how do we kind of protect our brand in a way? I don't know if you've thought already about this, and maybe it would be also interesting to see if you've seen any kind of attempts for technology out there that is looking into this, maybe some examples. I'm kind of hinting actually on the blockchain and Web3, because there is a lot of that happening right now in blockchain space, because it's actually really, I don't know, Johannes, maybe you can answer this question. You are very technical, one of the most technical, I guess.
Sure. I just don't want to constantly talk. So Matt, Moin, if you want to have a first go, please.
Sure. I mean, I think maybe from a legislation perspective, I think there's a few things which are beginning to happen. So the European Union is already kind of moving to make anyone who's using data sets kind of confirm where that is coming from. And I think that is something that kind of feels inevitable. And to your deep fake point, I think at some point that authentication of the content that you're watching is going to become necessary. I think as a consumer, whether you're watching something on TV or on your mobile device, I think we will probably rapidly need to get to the point where something is watermarked or stated that this is AI generated. Is that something that is going to be required, or isn't it? I mean, I don't know. When you go and see a movie, do you need to be told that something visual effects have been used in the creation of that film? You're going specifically to see something. But I guess it's that crossover where within kind of the political arena and the news arena, where things could move very quickly if you're not entirely sure whether something is authentic or not, that becomes challenging. And the ways in which technically you can do that, Moin and Johannes can touch on a little bit, but yeah, at scale, I think there might be some challenges to some of the proposed methods.
I'm just going to really quickly say, I think one of the biggest problems is how do you attribute the ownership of the original idea? So if you are using an algorithm to generate an image, for example, and that image is your output, and that's what you kind of go and commercialize, how do you then attribute what percentage was inspired by this person, what percentage was inspired by this, what percentage belongs to the algorithm, whatever it may be. So if for example, in the case of the project that we've just done, we had things inspired by Balenciaga, but some of the data set was also created by Johannes. It was an artificial data set. So we had real data, and then we had kind of derived data, and all of that was used as training data. So then how much do you attribute where and to whom? If Balenciaga decides to come in, if we were to commercialize this and Balenciaga decides to come in and kind of take us to court, how would you argue how much was done by them, how much wasn't? And you've got this kind of percentage attribution there. That database, that kind of ability to dive in and segment that out is really, really quite tricky and quite labored. And that's just for one example. That's for one still image, because you can go five frames on and the image can have a completely different weighting, different attribution within the model. So already you've got this kind of minefield there. I've seen people talking about putting this on blockchain, trying to kind of use that as but the size of database you'd need to do that, you'd need to have oversight of every single image that's ever been created to know that where the ownership was, where it's derived from. That size of just, like I said, the data set, the oversight for that, it's just unfeasible. There aren't enough machines in the world to do that. There aren't enough people in the world to check that that's going to work. I mean, people are always trying to throw blockchain as a solution to kind of track things, but no one thinks about the practical background of it, is that you'd need sort of a data set sort of orders of 10 much bigger in order to even be able to start tracing things. You can't trace something until you know what all the possible sources are. And so to have all the possible sources of input in the world, to then attribute data from an image and then give it correct weightings and then give correct royalties to the next person, it's just unfeasible, just from a practical, real world kind of physics point of view.
And I second that. It becomes a problem of the source and the data set. I think that it's true that there's now lots of people in that space trying to do it the right way. And for example, I want to be able to make my own data in the visual effects context. You know, if you imagine you have a data set that's really based on American highways that you actually photogrammetrized and rendered, and so they're mine, then I can be really good at making American highways with AI, and I can truly say this is mine. It's all good. But there's also obviously the matter of deepfakes. And if you look at the screen now, I can do a little magic trick now, and suddenly
Keanu.
Suddenly you're talking to somebody else, and it's just, we can do that on a Zoom call now. So while audio is still a little bit away, and it's not perfect, I can fool you in a magic trick quite quickly, and I can switch between different characters and all sorts of things. Sorry, I'm just trying to drive this while I'm talking and trying to make it so as if it would just be magic and it would always
That is
work.
pretty. Oh, love it.
No, I knew it wasn't Keanu, because Keanu wouldn't be talking, he'd just be sulking.
But yeah, so the deepfakes are a thing now, and it is well, this is obviously a bit more of a joke. It works really well, and that's where my true scare is, that I am worried in a world where already information and misinformation is a thing. It goes really far away now from the fashion context or everything, but that's my true worry. That's where I'm trying to be as ethical and as positive as possible. So that deepfake project I work on is usually not resurrecting people or something from the dead for a movie. It's more like it's usually in the deepfake for good space. So I'm trying to use the technology in a good way. But that's honestly my true worry is not that the AI takes our jobs, because there's going to be other jobs and it's all transformative and blah, blah, blah. What I'm worried about is that society is already so disjointed, and having a ability to create fake, even just text, even just wrong information, having, a 4 and an 8-year-old that is growing up in this world, is like, how are they going to ever verify the information? And seeing them having to deal with it is something that worries me. But I think we can do this, and it's good that we start thinking about it very early on already, and not once the atomic bomb has been tested, suddenly we're like, oh, what are we going to do now? It's more like we're doing it while we're developing. At least it's still worrisome, but it's at least we're getting there.
It's really a big area in blockchain right now. So I think the whole year going to be around that, to be honest. Like lots of tooling I'm starting to create. And I think it's not just like face and identity, but also how do you actually protect your skills and, or anything really, like, and it's possible to have your own passports where you can, maybe like, so that's what people are imagining right now. You have your own digital IDs, digital passports where you can all of your things, and like, and that will be protected by you.
I just gonna I was about to refer to Johannes, but just as Jim Carrey was saying to us earlier, the genie's kind of already out the bottle. These models, these deep fakes, everything's already out there, and no one has been monitoring those and the sources of those. You had some court cases, I think it was Stable Diffusion kind of being sued by Getty Images and so on, because they were saying, a lot of it's attributed to their database and so on. But, there's no kind of hard and fast proof. There's no models for all of the images that are already out there, all of the kind of creations that are already out there. So again, that poses a problem for the kind of blockchain solutions. Blockchain by its definition needs to be end to end to work. It needs to have source all the way through to kind of, that sort of transparency all along the chain. But if you've got a whole bunch of data out there that's unattributed and unsourced, you've already got a contaminated pool. So it's, that's another problem right there. But then there's the kind of legal jurisdictions too, because the jurisdictions in the States change from state to state. Between that and Europe, between Europe and Asia, the laws are different across all of them. And I think that's where blockchain struggled so far with contracts, smart contracts, all those things. They have jurisdiction within that one chain, but they don't have jurisdiction across state lines. They don't have jurisdiction internationally. And I think that's going to be another thing that is a problem. You've got technical problems, you've got legal problems, and then you've got the problems of there aren't enough people, data, computers in the world to manifest it. So it's an admirable pursuit, but I think it's another one where people are just over applying blockchain to something that it's not fit for purpose, personally.
Also, there is a question in the comments I quickly want to mention from Adita, who is a part of Startup. And the question is, what do you think of Gen Z kids and VTubing? A lot of our avatars saved to wallets get used for VTubing. It's directed to Johannes, but if you have any comments.
I think it's a natural thing. Like digital self-expression is a known thing now. We've just progressed from, what color is your cape in Zelda in 1990 something to, do I want to be Kenny Reeves today, or do you want to be myself or something completely different? And I feel that's good. I think the whole idea of digital self-expression and being diverse in how you express yourself online, if everybody plays nice. Because of course this could be, that's what I was trying to say at the beginning. Like I'm all up for YouTuber and VTubers being a different character because that's what their audience likes and what they like to be. That's cool. But what if Keanu Reeves does not like me suddenly having, all my 10 subscribers on Instagram? If they're suddenly, if he doesn't like me using his face, and that's where it gets tricky. You are talking to somebody who is very deep into open source software, and open source is an idea. So I'm struggling when people are saying, yeah, but I need to protect my brand. It's easy for me to say because I don't have one necessarily. So probably if I would have, X 100,000 subscribers and needed to do that, I would probably think differently. But, as I am a digital mercenary who just makes pretty pictures, I can obviously do that quite easily. But so far, every time I've seen a technology that I was involved with being guarded, it was hard to use and failing. And every time I instantly, from the get-go, shared it with everybody, it was a success. I feel like that we have to think about our data in that sense a little bit more openly, because I don't really care if 3 pictures of me posing somewhere end up in a data set, which then ends up creating 7 pixels in the eyeball of somebody else's. It's very abstract. Obviously, I wouldn't like, my actual face to go all over the internet, or maybe it does, and maybe it helps. See what I mean? Like, it's so diverse and such a complicated topic that I don't think sitting on data and saying this is me only in a world where everything is changing every 2 weeks is beneficial to anybody. So my personal opinion is that sharing as much and being as open as possible while having a strong sense of what's right and the truth is the best approach. How to do that is hard, but I think blockchain is one of the things that can help us with that, at least to verify the source of content. But as Moin said, having a whole, it's a total, at least to my technical understanding of the whole process, it is a very hard thing to say, we just have all the pictures that go into a data set hashed into a blockchain, and then suddenly everybody magically makes money. Because it's a neural networks, and I don't want to get too technical, your brain is really complicated. And a neural network is, while it's an input-output machine, what happens inside is really complicated too. To just say, it's not a one-to-one mapping of this picture or that Moin took at his holiday is now used to 2% in this completely different hallucinated image. This is not how it works. That's just not how it works. We have to forget about it. This is not how this. It's not just copy and pasting pixels. It's a hallucination of something that has been trained on a data set, and that's how its brain has evolved into a state where it can hallucinate that images. It's like saying, if you think of a drawing now that, the picture your friend showed you 2 years ago is now somehow in that drawing. It probably is somehow conceptually, but to say how much of it is currently in that picture that you're drawing is impossible to do.
I quickly want to add a comment. I think from your perspective, it's so interesting because if you take this to fashion or art people in their industry, they would probably totally be like disagreeing, because their whole revenue comes from having original ideas and like creating the storyline. And if somebody comes in fashion and rips somebody else off, it's a big fuss that they're making. So I think this is so interesting, because a lot of people would, I think, see this and be like, what? But my brand, I built this, and I built, this vision and this originality of, even though we know everything is based on the past, kind of. But yeah,
and I think to that point, if you're utilizing those tools to kind of replicate something that already exists in kind of an exact manner, then you are absolutely copying it. I'd say, Johannes, it's like, how do you learn to draw? You look at lots of images until you learn how to draw, and like that is kind of effectively what's happening. You draw your own until the point you don't need to look at those images anymore. Or how you learn to write, that you have your own style that is developed based on everything that you see. And I think to that question about how do brands become more open source yet still generate the revenue to keep running, is that, potentially that is where authentication begins to become important, because ultimately all of this is doing is driving people back to that brand. That brand presence has a power, it has a story, it has a reason. That's why they're there. It's why they remain. It's why luxury continues to grow at an extraordinary rate. It's because there is such desire to buy into those brands. And I think like accepting that, like the Balenciaga AI movie, which I'm sure everyone's seen, is kind of amazing, and it drives aspiration to become part of that story. These tools are not taking that away. I think they're adding to it. They're adding the value. Of course, we will see new brands emerge from this, utilizing these tools as well. I think that is also inevitable. But I don't think in any way this is kind of a big threat to existing luxury brands and how they operate. I think it's another way for them to ride and to utilize what's out there to maximize conversation about who they are, the aspiration. Ultimately, this is about someone kind of still wanting to go into one of those stores and physically purchase one of those products, because if you can do that, if you reach that point where you can afford to do that, then you feel good about yourself. And ultimately, our industry is about emotion. None of us need to buy anything more. We all have enough clothes. The reason we do it is because we fall in love with something. That, for me, is ultimately where this has always been, is how do we use those tools to evoke that emotional connection to something that is that spur for you to say, I love it, I want it.
And to add a tiny bit to that is, how can we do exactly what you just described, but coming from a more diverse source of creatives. Yeah. So rather than this coming from only a select few who have the power to do that, having more people able to tell those stories and create those emotions and create those products at the end of the day is, in my book, a good thing.
I think it's a really positive note, and thank you for that.
I'm seeing Namala, so I want to quickly
ask. Wow, I think that last bit was really, really on point. And I actually am curious, we were talking about, you mentioned like the IP, we're talking about IP and creative ideas, and how, people do get like very up in arms if someone takes this trend or whatever. Do you feel like that is a cultural thing that will change over time? Because there was, in ancient, traditions, like this concept of copyright or IP, I guess, was not, now it's part of our law and it's very part of our business models and things like that. Do you feel like, maybe in 50 years, this culturally, we won't be so, I guess, upset by, like you said, to learn to draw, you reference everyone. How, I don't know, is it a cultural thing? Even in like, Jamaican reggae music, it's all about remixing and taking people's music and making versions. And that's just culturally the way they do it. They don't really look at it as like breaching copyright. So yeah, do you feel like maybe this is a cultural thing that will change over time?
I personally think yes. I think you've hit it a lot there, because there's already a whole a group of people who are really embracing this open sourceness of identity, idea, and brand to the extreme, where this just as you say, in certain cultures, like with reggae music is a great example, but also there's a whole YouTube meme culture thing that also already remixes the whole, like, taking a video on TikTok and redoing it in a different style. I would say what you're saying is right. The only thing where you're wrong is your timeline. I think it's gonna happen. If it hasn't happened already in parts of society, it will happen like in the next year or two, where not necessarily from the top down, but from the bottom up, this notion of being more open about what's yours and how you use it. Again, looking at my 80-year-old who's, has starting to have an online life with games and whatnot, their understanding of remixing is already different. So I think that the generation that has that cultural shift embedded in themselves is already existing. They just need to grow up a bit till they can actually type fast enough. Then I think that it's going to be there.
I think Mr. Bean makes some very valid points. Who knew he was so sage? But another thing I just kind of wanted to mention, that's a great question, Amala, because that whole cultural aspect of it, and I don't know if capitalism counts as a culture, but if you look at the kind of technical aspects of AI, and kind of if you listen on a lot of sort of technical chats, one of the themes that's coming out of it is that capitalism is at odds with AI. They're completely divergent paths. You've got this kind of communal data set that's being used to create new stuff, and all of it's available to everyone. And then you've got people trying to slice that up and trying to own it and hold on to it and kind of put walls around it and silo it. Then it breaks down. As soon as you do that, as soon as you start owning it, chopping it up, trying to keep what's yours and trace it, it no longer is this kind of open pool. It ceases to be, essentially, is kind of the easiest way to put that. But capitalism is really quite at odds with AI. And as we discussed before, the genie's out the bottle. It's already happening. It's already happened. And that traceability and that ownership of it is going to be a really difficult one to argue. And you'd spend more time arguing the ownership of things than you would creating things. And I think it'll either put a huge handbrake on it, which it won't, because it's already out there and people are using it and people are going to use it regardless, or people will have to just relax their ideas of what ownership is and who things belong to and tracing things and so on. I think the energy required to kind of litigate those kinds of moot points is just, I think people will just give up. I think they'll just realize.
Yeah, but it also kind of points to that polarity of society as well, where if you kind of begin to use garments and outfits from another culture, that suddenly you inflame kind of the topic of cultural appropriation and who can and should take data from somewhere. Like, I think you even see that extended now to kind of cooking and fusion food. Like, should different foods be put together? And you can see where social media, and to Johannes' point, of that becomes this source of conversation of outrage constantly at one end or the other. I think this is where there will be a lot of friction over the years ahead as we begin to forge in that. Like, it's essential that we have this creative pool that we are able to create from as wide a database as possible. But that will inevitably is going to create some conflict.
And just another point to add to that in terms of that data pool and so on, certainly in terms of imagery, the database that we're training things on is basically a Western pool of data. You don't get nearly as many historic photographs from Africa, from Asia, from the kind of global South, for want of a better term. Images generally tend to be generated in the West, much more kind of with much more proliferation. And so then there's a kind of an inbuilt weighting to all of our data sets already, certainly on that visual side, probably also on the audio side too. So you've kind of got to bear that in mind, that, we think you've got this kind of fair and unbiased output because it's trained on everything in the world, and you've got this kind of sources, but you've got these quite curated sources of Asian culture, African culture, West Indian culture, all these kinds of things. So I think that's another thing to kind of bear in mind, is that kind of weighting of data sets, even within that. It's something that people are looking at.
And how people respond to it. You kind of see the response for Levi's and their campaign, which kind of landed around increasing diversity, I think was the phrase.
Which is how I had that idea. But again, I think with the biases, this is something that's very dear to me, and I really try to avoid that in what I'm creating. But the problem is not AI. The problem is already there. So if you look at the last 10, 15 years of images created, there is just a bias in it still. And there's two ways to think about this. Either by changing the data sets, which I find very hard because the data sets are based on what's there, and what's there inherently is biased, just because everybody has a bias and history and whatnot. But what you can also do is change your model to train the bias away. By that I mean you can artificially, for lack of a better term, change the weights. And by weights, I don't mean necessarily the technical term of what happens at a perceptron level, which is a weights and biases, is something else. But like the weighting of the input of your question into, I'm trying to not screw technical terms up, but the weighting that you do to the input into the system, to this input-output machine, towards a model that you as the creator of that model want to represent. So if I type in doctor, it doesn't show me only white dudes as doctors, or at least or only males. And if you type in nurse, you see only ladies. If you don't want that bias, as you know, this is just one of the classic examples that happened in the early days of the image creation software. If you don't want that, yeah, you can change your model so it doesn't have that. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to now suddenly source the right pictures, because that is a crazy undertaking. But if you look at your model as it is, I feel like it's your responsibility to give this model the attributes. It's like you're training your kids in a bit. That sounds a bit much, but but it's your thing that you're training. So if it does the wrong thing, you can introduce certain, I don't want to say punishments because it's the wrong, but a certain kind of biases to unbias the model, if that makes any sense.
I think this whole conversation, you can see how around IP, everyone kind of is super interested in it, because we're all asking ourselves this question. But another big one is something that Matthew has mentioned before, is how do we solve this waste crisis, and how do we really maybe use the technology to ultimately be better as humans, or to fuel the industry kind of forward. And I would love some maybe comments on how can we actually drive there. Is there a deeper thing that we have to change as humanity, or is this something that you think is going to be still exploited with AI and emerging technologies? I would love to have some thoughts on how this is going to adopt in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a huge problem. And I think, so at London College of Fashion, we've had a Centre for Sustainable Fashion for longer than my team has been. So I'm 10 years at the college. I think CSF is now maybe 15 years in, something like that. And I would say across the college that sustainability and kind of best practice in that, so it's not something I really feel like I need to talk to students about. It seems kind of embedded in their behavior. And yet, when you look at consumption figures, they only get bigger. I feel like this is something which is still so big. And you see businesses, and I already mentioned Shein, which is blowing all of our kind of more traditional Western fast fashion out of the water. With all of the advances in technology, we still don't see any impact on consumption. We're consuming more, we're creating more. Those behaviors are not changing. I think the hope and the aspiration is that we can use these digital tools to begin to challenge that behavior. We know through 3D design that we can have a really significant impact on wastage in supply chain, that is a much more practical, efficient, sensible way to approach, and that we have to see more 3D design across the industry. That is beginning to be adopted more. And like Moin mentioned, there's one luxury brand we were with recently that has 400 digital designers on board. That is not the norm, but it is an amazing example of where people are beginning to realize this is moving to. But I think to kind of where digital fashion, if I think back to 2019, 2020, there was a huge surge in a belief that perhaps consuming digitally might impact on our physical consumption. And, you know, all of those statistics around how many shoppers and consumers are buying product just to take photos on social media and then throwing the product away. I think 1 in 10 UK shoppers back in 2020 were admitting to doing that. So the number clearly was significantly higher. Like, the tools exist, like we've just shown, to generate images very quickly of you wearing something. You can, if there is a need to show yourself wearing something on such a regular basis for social media, you can do that in a different way than actually buying physical product. There is another way to do that. How big a dent that makes in people who are actually going out shopping, I think we still have a long way to go on that. I know Moin will have some thoughts on that. And then I might have to jump fairly shortly. But yeah, Moin, do you want to kind of keep going on that thread?
Well, yeah, I mean, just to kind of mention that digital design part of it, you know, as Matt said, yeah, there's a lot of kind of saving to be made there. 80 to 90% of a carbon footprint of a garment occurs in the design and manufacture stage. So before it even gets to shops, before it gets to the end consumer. So there's a lot of potential saving there. And digital design is one important way to do that. Saves on sort of sampling, toiling, shipping samples from, you know, Asia to Europe and back again, and those kinds of things. And just, you know, just the obvious saving in offcuts, materials, that kind of thing. So there is that kind of huge potential there. But then, you know, as Matt said, you've got the culture that we've kind of developed. I think it's over the last 30 years, we've more than doubled our kind of clothing consumption, rate of clothing consumption, and it's set to happen again within the next 15. So it's, you know, it's quite a frightening prospect, the amount of kind of garments that are being made. And although you can make those savings through digital design, it also means that there's the possibility to produce goods faster and more targeted through digital design as well. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It could save us, but it could make things far worse, and we could all turn into Shein and produce garments very, very quickly at a lot of saving to ourselves as brands, and then push them out to consumers and produce them locally and do sort of onshoring and all those sort of wonderful things that people talk about. But you're still producing more and more stuff, and it's still got to end up somewhere. And, you know, until everything is made in a way that it can be kind of completely circular and recycled and all those things, which there's some pressure for, but not enough to kind of affect it at the rate that it needs to happen. It really is a double-edged sword, unfortunately.
I would like to add to that only that from a democratization point of view, I feel like that if you make something for yourself, or you can, you're the person in your street made something, or in your group made something for you, there's a longevity in that versus if a big brand presents it to you. So I have a feeling, again, this is based on zero evidence. It's just on gut feeling, but I think it's an interesting thought to think that, I mean, what we really need to invent is something that can unravel and recreate a garment, like in Star Wars when they have the replicator, Star Trek, sorry, where you have the replicator and say, I want this, and it just appears. Till we have that where you have to cycle locally the 3D printed outfit that you design every night. I think there's a long ways to go, but I think this is definitely a step in the right direction.
All right, I think we're running out of time, but there is one burning question I think Mari from NEWFORUM would like to ask.
Yeah, hey everyone, this was an amazing discussion. Thank you so much. When we were putting this forum together, I think we're thinking a lot along the lines of this remix kind of culture and the elements of play. And I love the fact that we're touching upon the diversity of creativity there. One of the things we actually experimented with about 3 or 3.5 years ago with New Life was actually how can you get like a lot of different feedback from people, like consumers of a brand, and then be able to like have that as part of the collection. So kind of combining like user generated content and data and training a model. And I would love to kind of understand if you feel like that is part of the future of this whole space. I think your project was really amazing to see, like very literally this on the runway. And I would love to know what you think about how can the kind of fans of a brand be involved with what that runway would look like in the future.
I think if I may start, you nailed it exactly on the head here, because that's exactly what the initial intent of the project. It didn't turn, we had to due to time and what other constraints, we couldn't go there. But the idea was, as Moin said at the very start, is to have something where you can type in anything that you would like to see and it appears on the runway. And I feel like in the experience of actually making those AI models, I realized that guiding is very important, because just typing something randomly doesn't get you anything good. So that's exactly what you're saying. It's a two-way street. Either you're collecting the data from a technical point of view. It's totally possible, by the way. This is all possible. You just have to put enough money and time into the project. But you could totally do a thing where you could generate images based on your interpretation of the brand, and they could go then get filtered and get into a data set, and suddenly you have something that can create a community-inspired outfit based on your brand and the community. Totally fine, totally possible. But you could also go the other way. You could have a model that is, in some sense, kind of chopped, like kind of almost like castrated to only do, like if you type in t-shirt, it makes a t-shirt in the style of my brand. So because it only knows, it's like Total Recall, like the idea of a t-shirt is extracted out of the brain and is replaced with the t-shirt that you want me to see. By that, I give the AI model the ability to be put in the wild, and suddenly everybody could create outfits and pictures based on purely what they're typing, but it's still guided towards the brand. I'm sure it makes sense. So either you have this way, so community makes pictures which go into the model, which I think is hard to then, because it still has to cut, because there's probably a lot of crap that comes in. So you don't, kind of want to filter that somehow with lots of pairs of eyes. Or you go the other way, where you say, here's a free model, do whatever you want with it, but you've prepared the models in a way that where, first of all, certain words are forbidden, because you don't want everything to be appearing. And secondly, the words that are appearing, or you have to stop thinking about this. I'm not saying you are, but just in general, one has to stop thinking about this as a simple machine with cogwheels, where you're like, you can just replace one and then we'll only do something else. But the concept, the idea, the memory of everything that is t-shirt or shirt or something could get replaced with the memory of something that I influence. It doesn't mean it always works, but that's the basic idea of technologies like Dream Boost and other stable diffusion kind of offshoots could offer that idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's that level of personalization. I think we're going to start seeing like a much closer relationship, and one which is more about you as an individual. Like I think back to a project that we did with Microsoft in lockdown, the digital human stylist, where we created digital Moin and digital Lisa from the team, and they were connected to the team's Outlook calendar, and you could, through HoloLens, you could talk to the digital stylist and assistant, and it was beginning to learn about you and what your style was, and could begin to physically, like right in front of you, you could talk to Moin and say, hey Moin, what should I wear today? And because he's such a style guru, he could make incredible suggestions. And like that relationship, that much more personal relationship with brands, is something that I feel like is kind of inevitable. Like all of the tools are there, that your own Jarvis, that is something where what could be created, and whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, does that fuel consumption, like Moin said, or does it kind of make us treasure? Like all of the statistics around bespoke and personalization are things where you will pay more for that and you will hold on to it for longer. That feels like a good thing. But if it allows it at scale, then I don't know. Is that just more and more product being created? I think it's got to come hand in hand with all of the other tools around circularity that we need to see come in to play. But it feels like if we can move us to a place where you value what you buy more, that you care about it more, that has to be a better thing. We need to change that kind of throwaway mentality. And I think if we can utilize the tools in a way to make you value it more, we're moving in the right direction.
Add on that, I think that once, like Moin said, once you actually have more and more data, you can actually start to basically go back retrospectively and understand even where trends are coming from. And I feel like if you are able to do that at scale, you can actually start to see where you should fund and where the quality is actually coming from and different things like that. So it gives you more of an oversight of the actual value of trends and which demographics those are being produced in, where people who have more money, bigger companies are able to then produce that and also to do so more locally and kind of change the financial stack, if you like. I think that's a lot what I'm thinking about is how would that look like that brands can actually have access to some kind of ledger of data that's being produced and then be able to do two simultaneous things. One is shift money to creative talents that are distributed, and also be able to just produce less, but more things that are actually demanded, rather than now they're chasing these trend cycles. They're scraping data from all over the internet, which is a form of, people's IP, is actually that, like taking trends data and not compensating people for what they liked online. This is a huge issue. And how could you kind of try to make more of a circular data system that could help? And obviously it's not going to be perfect. It will take years to really get to that. I think having the different parts of this circular financial stack that is based on data is really important in this equation.
There's a really interesting brand that you should check out called Finesse in the US. Since 2020, they've been doing something quite similar to what you described, where they analyze trends data and then they put together style references from the latest trends. And I think they do this on a monthly basis. And they use AI to generate collections based on the latest trends in that month. And then they get their community to vote on their favorite 3 garments from that collection. And then they put them into production and sell them. And they do it at quite a quick pace that comes out within next 6 to 9 weeks or whatever it might be. And then they kind of change that up every month or so. Quite an interesting business model. It kind of feels a little bit fast fashion in a way, but targeted fast fashion, on trend fast fashion. But it's also quite interesting in that it's kind of sourcing that and getting the kind of community to vote on their favorite 3 rather than just putting up everything that the AI creates. Which might be an interesting one for you to look at.
All right. It's been such a fascinating conversation. I would love to thank you guys for joining us today. And it's been really, really valuable and interesting and insightful. And I'd like to thank all of the guests for chipping in, asking really cool questions and commenting.
Yeah, I think this was amazing. Thank you all for joining. And it's really, like we mentioned at the beginning, opening the dialogue of where we're heading in the space. And transmedia fashion is such an interesting topic of resonance with our community. So we're hoping to see you very, very soon in the next panel. And always feel free to chip in, ask questions, and be part of the community we're building. So thank you everyone for joining.